Yep.
Great, thank you. Jeffrey, your disclaimer, please.
Sure. Thank you, everybody, for attending the meeting. Just to remind you, this meeting is being recorded, and a copy of the meeting will be placed on the authority's YouTube page after the meeting. So all conversation should be mindful that it will be in the public domain. So with that, I will turn it over to our chairperson, Audrey Carter.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Good afternoon and welcome to everyone. This is the April 28th meeting of the Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority for Harrisburg. I'm going to immediately bounce it back to Jeffrey and ask him to give a report on, oh, whoops, no, I went ahead. First order of business is approval of the minute. I hope everyone's had a chance to review them. Are there any edits that anyone has found? If not, I would entertain a motion for the approval of the ICA minutes for the meeting on March 24th, 2021.
So moved.
Thank you, Kathy. Second.
Second.
Thank you, Doug. Any comments? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Now, Jeffrey, might I throw it back to you for a report on the authority's business?
Sure. So this is our summary of paid bills for the period ending April 28th, 2021. Some good news to start off with. Thank you to the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development, of which we have 2 representatives in the room. The authority did receive its second half of the current fiscal year allocation of proceeds from the Commonwealth. So we received a check for $58,000, which has been deposited into our checking account. So thank you. In addition to the deposit, we had expenditures. We had 2, 4, 6, 7 expenditures in this period. That should help. We had 7 expenditures in this period, and we had a starting balance of $65,818.84, and we had a final balance of $116,612.41 as a result of the deposit. So thank you very much. And if there's any questions, feel free to ask or use the chat feature, and I'll be happy to answer any questions on the business of the authority.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I'm going to invoke chair's prerogative and move my report down later in the agenda. So I'd like to start right now by turning it over to Dan, who's going to give an update on the City of Harrisburg financial activities. Dan?
Let me get to Dan unmuted there.
Sure. A couple of kind of milestones in regards to the AMBAC negotiations and the financing that we reached recently. The city and AMBAC came to an agreement on a third amended and restated settlement agreement regarding the forbearance liability associated with the 1997 D and F general obligation bonds. If you recall, the city defaulted on that debt years ago, and AMBAC agreed to make payments on debt service. The city started accruing a liability associated with AMBAC making those payments, and the liability has grown now to $25.5 million. The city and AMBAC engaged in negotiations to address that liability on mutually agreeable terms. And we came to an agreement that was introduced to council last night, a resolution for their consideration. The agreement would include the city agreeing to defease the stadium bonds, the Series 2005 A2 bonds that were issued by the Harrisburg Redevelopment Authority, but guaranteed by the city. Last year with COVID, the city had to make the full debt service payment on those bonds. The city had been making partial payments on those bonds anyways. So that increased the risk profile on that debt from the city's perspective, and it was also very inflexible in terms of being non-callable. Those bonds were insured by AMBAC, so they have an interest in, the city prepaying those. In exchange for the city defeasing that debt, AMBAC is going to apply a credit to the city's forbearance liability, which is accruing at 6.75%. So it's a very expensive liability. The credit will equal about $1.8 million, just under that. It's 38% of the par amount outstanding at the time of the defeasance, which will equal $1.8 million if the defeasance is executed prior to or after the May 15th debt service payment date. In addition, AMBAC will also give credit on the city liability, the forbearance liability, on any prepayments up to $4 million of prepayments. They will kick in an extra 38% of those prepayments up to $4 million. So if the city maximizes that benefit, it would be not just $4 million of paying down 6.75% debt, but also about $1.52 million of additional credit on top of that. As part of the agreement, the city would have to execute the defeasance by the end of this calendar year. And the city also agrees to prioritize the refinancing of that city liability, that forbearance liability, before issuing debt for capital purposes, doing another GO obligation. So, we thought this was a very good deal for the city. It's a good deal for both parties. And we were happy to introduce it to council last night. The other development was hopefully the introduction to council last night to engage Stifel Nicholas as underwriter to be part of the financing team to refinance the city liability and the defeasance of the 2005 stadium bonds. The final plan of finance has not been set, but they're going to be the city's underwriter if council goes through the process and makes their approval. And I don't want to get too far ahead of council, and they certainly want to respect them. But Stifel Nicholas was selected as part of a competitive bidding process. We were very impressed with their approach to the financing and the understanding of the city's needs, and their ability to execute the transaction nationwide. They are no one has done more negotiated public finance deals than Stifel. So we're confident in their ability to execute and their understanding of the city. So those are two important developments that we wanted to get the ICA in the loop on. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. I want to respect city council too with this whole process, but also keep the IC in the loop as appropriate.
Any follow-up questions for Dan or Ralph?
Dan, thanks for the report. I just have one question. When you describe the agreement to prioritize certain aspects of that restructuring, could you explain what that means?
To prioritize that the city will refinance it as long as the forbearance liability is outstanding. The city will not issue other general obligation debt, but for certain exemptions, minor exemptions carved out in the agreement. We thought this was a reasonable provision. It's one that we discussed thoroughly with AMBAC. We have the city has every incentive to refinance this debt as soon as possible.
Oh my gosh, yeah. But so so theoretically, could you refinance the forbearance liability, like soon, and then subsequently thereafter have the flexibility to issue debt for capital improvement projects, for example?
Yeah, as soon as the city liability the forbearance liability is retired, there's no restriction.
So it could be refinanced, not just paid, didn't have to be paid out of cash on hand, for example.
It's as soon as the city liability is retired, whether it's refinanced or paid
Okay.
with cash or whatever.
Thanks.
Any other questions? I had one just on a different topic. Wondered if the city had gotten any more clarity on the American Rescue Plan monies that are coming. And if so, how the planning is going to get ready for that.
Sure. I don't think that there's any more clarity. I think every municipality across the country is waiting sort of with bated breath in terms of what the detailed regulations are going to be in regards to, the permissible uses. There's the high level guidelines that there have been umpteen webinars on, and folks have something of an idea, but until those details are known, I know that the city is a little hesitant in terms of committing to a certain plan or not. But I know that there are conversations on different levels of government. I think Neil is raising his hand, so I don't, maybe he can wants to chime in.
The only information we have, I just wanted to let you know where we're at, is we were told that we will have something from the federal government on May 10th in terms of guidance, whether the final regulations or the initial ones. But we're really just now sort of hanging, waiting for those to come. But that is the timeline at the moment that we've been promised when we will get at least something in guidance.
Thank you. I can't even imagine the massive flood of RFPs that are going to hit the market at the same time. So any other questions for Dan? Jeffrey?
Dan, if you could just go over fast, I know you might have covered it, but the idea of the stadium debt and how that's going to be rolled into whatever is done in the final AMBAC settlement. If you can just cover that again, maybe just highlight what the idea was.
Well, the idea is to defease those bonds before, the requirement is to defease them before the end of the year. The city is going to evaluate scenarios, whether it's through financing or cash defeasance. And that'll depend on, different factors like fund balance targets and what the terms of the financing would be. But in either way, the city will be defeasing that debt for the end of the year.
Excellent. Thank you. That was my only question.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate your presentation. We look forward to the financial plan, which I believe you had indicated would be coming by the end of the week, or let's say at the end of the week. So we look forward to that.
Well, we look forward to getting it off our plate. So.
The old heave ho. Thanks again. At this point, I would like to turn to Marita Kelly, the Act 47 coordinator for the city. As I've said before, she's a tireless advocate for the city and an ever-present colleague to all of us on the ICA board. She's going to give us an update on her first quarter 2021 report. Marita, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I appreciate it. And thank you for the nice comments. I appreciate that as well. Hello, everyone. Good to see your smiling faces, as always. Good to see you, Dan. Haven't seen you in a while. As you know, I completed and submitted to the Commonwealth Court my first quarter status report. The city during the first quarter was able to fully execute the OPEB trust documents, and the city council has approved them. The next step is not something I can discuss at great length, but there is about $3.3 million that the strong plan has set aside for that trust. And when Mr. Grover, I think I see him there, hello, Neil, gives me the word that the trust, he and Mr. Woolley that the trust is in the position to accept that, then we'll be dealing with that through the courts and through Mr. Grover in the future. But that's all excellent news. Thank you, Neil and the city for your due diligence, and the city council, of course, and the mayor for their due diligence in helping to formulate that trust, which would be a terrific benefit to the city. And I think everybody will see that as a win-win. So I was very, very happy to see that progress. And it's certainly an achievement. Also, the city, their general fund balance at the end of the quarter was, I would say, robust. 39 million in the general fund, which is a good, sturdy, steady amount this early in the fiscal year. And then the neighborhood services fund their fund balance stood at 6.8 million. Again, relatively healthy. And then there's several components. You all have received a copy of the operational components and the various activities with Laxwama and with Tremont Capital, who is the parking concierge. So if you have any specific questions, it's a kind of lengthy report. I don't want to be boring anyone with the specific details, but I'd be happy to entertain them. Overall, I think the city sits in a reasonably good position, and it's onward and upward is our hope. So of course, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to entertain them.
Any questions for Marita? Jeffrey?
Marita, I know you didn't want to go through the entire lengthy story of the parking, but can you at least summarize it as to what the condition, is it still as negative as it was the last time we sort of did that deep dive into the situation?
Yeah, the parking is, it's a tough situation right now with COVID. It's certainly improved, but there is a schedule on page 13, which was the year-end schedule. You can see the revenues are down almost in half compared to last year, and compared to other years, a little bit less or so. But it's, an enormous challenge for Tremont and for PEDFA to be wading through these deep waters. They had a bond payment that had to be made, and they had to cut into their reserves to do that. No one likes to do that if they don't have to, but the hope is with the Commonwealth coming back on July 1, full time, full speed, hopefully we'll be able to catch up. The Commonwealth has continued the payment on their parking garages, which has been a big help. We obviously have to because we have a commitment. But the money has, definitely impacted everyone, including the city, with losses to revenue. Again, that's outlined on page 12. So it's been a tough circumstance for parking for the city, but the hope is that there'll be a robust return here in July, and that we'll be able to get, PEDFA, as you know, PEDFA is a Commonwealth entity, and Tremont will be able to get back on some more solid ground, so that the county and AGM won't be bearing the full brunt of the bond payments, and that recovery will come fast and furious is our hope. And we have started to see street parking certainly come back to some level. I think as the weather gets warmer, more restaurants are open with the outdoor dining. There's more businesses opening, not just restaurants and bars, but also just, nail salons and hair salons and things like that. So again, the hope is that we're past the worst of the situation, and the president will be making a presentation tonight about the status of the vaccinations. But as you know, many of us have been vaccinated, and that's all been a good thing. So the hope is that the first quarter and the last 4 quarters from last year were difficult for the parking circumstance, but the hope is that we'll get back onto some solid ground. I'm not the expert. I rely on Mr. Gass, John Gass, who is my who reports to me on this parking information. And of course, Steve Drizzos, who I think you've had come before you to speak, is the PEDFA contact from the Commonwealth. So, suffice it to say, I'm reporting based on what's been reported to me and what the city has reported in terms of their parking. That schedule that came on page 13 came from Brian McCutcheon. He was gracious enough to provide it to Bev Hutzel and then to me. So I did not get the first quarter because usually they're running about a quarter behind before they can give me real solid numbers. So if you notice that this report usually is about a quarter behind on the parking, that's why. So again, I'm not the foremost expert on this topic. I'm just reporting what's been reported to myself.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
Thank you very much, Madam
Thank
President. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Marita. I'm looking forward to a lunch at some point outdoors. It'll be fun to be back in somewhat normalcy. The next item on the agenda is the Section 203 annual report, and I asked Ralph if he could take that one on quickly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the reporting obligations under Act 124, there's a couple. So this one we've been calling the Section 203 report. It's produced annually, and it's due 120 days from the end of the city's fiscal year. So coming up here in a couple days will be the 120-day deadline to submit that report. It would be our second time preparing and submitting this report, and it gets submitted to various interested parties in the Commonwealth, including members of the General Assembly and the governor himself. And then the report is publicly accessible and available. The report, a draft has been created by, thank you to Jeffrey for getting started with it. And then our little subcommittee consisting of myself and our chairwoman. And the draft was sent out by Jeffrey to the authority members in advance of today. Pending any feedback from anybody, we would like to ask for concurrence on the report in order to submit it. We'd like to ask the authority members for comments if you have any. Otherwise, we'd like to, when the time is correct, Madam Chair, I'll be pleased to make a motion to request concurrence from the members in order to finalize and then submit the report on time.
I think we can do that now. And then I'll ask.
Okay, I'll be pleased to make that motion.
But can I make a comment real quick?
Yes.
Is this time for comment on the report itself?
Well, it's not a public document yet. So, yeah, but I would encourage you to share it with me. Please, you've already given me some good update, so I appreciate that, and we'll get that incorporated. Thank you, Dan. Back, so we have a motion on the floor needing a second.
Second.
Kathy, all those in, any other discussion, questions, clarifications? If not, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. I will work with Ralph to finalize it, and Jeffrey will make sure it gets into the hands of all the appointing authorities and other related individuals who need to get a copy of that. At this time, I would like to move to open my chair's report, which I delayed from the beginning. I thought it was, rather than tangling things up, as appropriate to keep everything in the right order. So this has to do with the agreement that City Council had some discussion about yesterday. And the ICA and the city have been working on this since November of 2019, when we first submitted our draft to the city. Our first draft numbered 30 pages. And it was fully respectful of the borders of Act 24. So we tried to provide a lot of clarity in that. Through much negotiation and accommodation to the city's request, we submitted a confidential proposed agreement to the city in February. And it numbered only 13 pages, coming in just over 40% of our original. So I want you to know that we carefully chose words and our points of importance as we kept whittling down. Last night, Neil Grover submitted our draft in its entirety for acceptance by City Council via Resolution 31 is at their working session. In it, he incorporated a request for some latitude to negotiate on a topic which our council had already shared the ICA's opinion. At the legislative meeting following their working session, City Council immediately and unanimously approved the resolution and the agreement. To move forward, it is important for the ICA to officially adopt the agreement as presented last night as our final agreement. To do so, I would like to ask for a motion.
I'll be pleased to make that motion.
Can I have a second?
Perhaps, Madam Chairman, Member Vartan would state the motion he wishes
Okay.
to make.
Oops.
To specify the motion, it would be a motion authorizing the authority to finalize and enter into the Intergovernmental Cooperation Agreement with the city as has been presented in the final draft prepared by our council,
Second.
which was, okay, thanks. A copy of which was, I think, an exhibit to the city council resolution provided to us.
We have a second on the floor. Any further discussion by the board members? Doug?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. And first, I do appreciate the work that's gone into the agreement. Paring it down to its essentials and as submitted to the city ultimately, and which Solicitor Grover submitted to council. I think it was appropriate to pare it down because really this agreement didn't need to recite most of the statute, but rather needed to provide clarity where we mutually needed to understand things like definitional matters or procedural matters where the statute might not have been clear enough. And then also to recognize some circumstances where the language of the statute differed in some ways from the real world that we're dealing with, whether a structural matter for the city or some divergence from the city code. And so I think by and large, the agreement does that. Now, my understanding from the city's meeting last night is that it was presented to them with differing language in section 405D, and the resolution that was presented authorized the city to sign the agreement whichever way that language was ultimately written. And it really comes down to changing one word, authorities needs, to parties needs. And that's in section 405D of the proposed agreement. My view is the difference between the wording is largely immaterial, but I thought it important to have some discussion today so that we're clear on intent. The statute itself establishes the right of the authority to require the city to furnish certain reports. and information, and really with not much additional clarification. And so Section 405D was added to recognize the concern that the city had expressed about things like availability of data or city capacity to generate a report or to generate it in the form and format that we request. And so Section 405D sets up a good faith process to find a way for us, the authority to get what we need, but in a way that the city can comply, and whether that's data, staff, or technological capability. And so I think the clear intent of this section is taking one step beyond the statute to set up that process to find accommodation with the city when necessary. And I think this is a necessary part of the agreement. Again, I don't know that I see a material difference in the two words. As a legal matter, I do, but in operationally, if this is a good faith process that we're specifying in 405D, I don't think the change in words one way or the other makes a material difference in what the process or outcomes are going to be. I think we do need to get this agreement completed. It's something that we've talked about for a considerable period of time. I think we've made considerable progress. I will ultimately support the motion. I recognize as well, as I understand from the action last night, the city also needs to take the matter up as a resolution, or I'm sorry, as an ordinance prior to final enactment as well. And that's to satisfy a couple other statutory requirements. So with that said, I just wanted to express those remarks so that they were understood and reflected in the minutes.
Thank you very much, Doug. I appreciate that. Are there other comments? If not, we have a motion and a second.
Just to echo some of Doug's comments, and my understanding as well of that section is pretty much precisely as Doug describes, that provision was inserted to help create a process that doesn't currently exist in the Act, that when the authority requests information or a report, whether it's the form doesn't exist or there's a difficulty in producing it, that there's a mechanism there that allows us to come together and try and modify the request in such a way to make it be fulfilled through cooperation. So I just wanted to take a moment on the minutes as well to echo Doug's comments as my understanding of that section as well, and my personal belief, the wording as it's presented in the draft under consideration for this motion, I think accomplishes that correctly. So that's my hope, intent as well.
Thanks, Ralph. I will call for a vote, please. All those in favor say aye.
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 None opposed. Motion carries. I see that we lost Neil because my last section is, and Anna Marie, you may be on.
I knew you were going to do that.
Yeah, because one of the things that's important is that we've got the approval for the agreement. However, we will not sign it right away because there's some contingencies that need to be met relative to timing. And so I was going to say, I'll turn it over to Neil, but Anna Marie,
Okay,
it's yours.
that's fine. As everybody may recall, there is pending in Commonwealth Court in front of Judge Ledbetter a series of matters involving the county and much of what you've talked about earlier in this meeting. All of those matters are affected by whether or not this agreement is signed, because under the terms of the Act, the signing of the agreement is one of the requirements for the removal of the city from distressed city status. Once that agreement is agreed to and signed, by operation of law, under certain provisions anyway, by operation of law, the city is automatically removed as a distressed city. That presents a few issues for some of the people involved in the Commonwealth Court litigation until their relationships and requirements are worked out. And so what Neil and the city have asked, and I think it's reasonable, is that the termination hearing that would be conducted by DCED become part and parcel of the Judge Ledbetter matter. And in that forum in Commonwealth Court, all of the extraneous issues that still remain will be parsed out, however that is, and however that needs to happen. And then once that order is issued, then this can be signed by both the city and the authority, and proceed to remove the city as a distressed city, and still have the remaining issues survive in Commonwealth Court. What the city doesn't want to have happen is all of that get sort of flushed out of Commonwealth Court and have to be restarted in another forum in another way, when so much progress has been made where they are now. So that's the goal, is to leave it in, leave it in Commonwealth Court. I don't think, in talking to the county earlier, I don't think that that's going to take long in terms of getting to Commonwealth Court, getting to Judge Ledbetter. But it's up to Neil to file the request. So at this point, the ball's in his court.
I think you did a great job, Anna Marie.
Very confusing stepping in. It's a sideways thing, quite honestly. It's the only way I can describe it.
Right. And we'll make sure that Jeffrey shares your little section with Neil and asks him to comment on that, so that in case we miss
he can provide much more detail. He gave me chapter and verse when we spoke earlier. He can give you much more detail.
Yep. Anybody have any questions based on what Anna Marie just shared?
So just so I can understand, the motion that was approved by the ICA is authorization to execute the agreement, but the agreement itself isn't going to be executed until it's determined that the proper time has arrived in the legal process to actually do it.
I don't want to say until Judge Ledbetter authorizes signature, because that overstates her role. She doesn't really have authorization control. There he is.
He's coming back in. Good.
Neil, your ears must have been burning. We were explaining the next steps in this process, and I said you do it much better than I.
And Anna Marie did a wonderful job of explaining the reason why we're not going to immediately execute the agreement, because there are so many contingencies that or consequences that need to be resolved with the court. So we were going to give you the section that you just covered.
Do you want to
briefly do it again?
Want to do a better job than I did?
And we'll vote.
Well, I wasn't gone on purpose. My phone just decided it did not want to participate anymore in the meeting. And I'm sure Anna Marie did a very good job with this, but there are a couple considerations in terms of jurisdictional matters under the Strong Plan that are significant to all the stakeholders involved. And we had met with the court in a status conference on March the 23rd to advise that we were prepared to proceed with an application for a final administrative order to exit Act 47 with the court, with the stipulation of the parties holding on to jurisdiction over some of the larger matters that were decided during receivership, such as the 40-year contract for parking, the contract for Laxwama for the incinerator. The court has to approve the AMBAC settlement agreement because they approved the prior one. The OPEB trust liability has to be held on to. A couple other settlement agreements that are under the plan. And by simply signing as an operation of law, if both parties did that, we would be out of Act 47 and divest the court of jurisdiction. That would be our concern. The incinerator litigation, which has been pending now for quite some time, there'd be concern if the court was divested, that case would go away accidentally. And we want to make sure with the Commonwealth that does not happen. So, we're trying to put this in an orderly manner. There's also the need for an ordinance, which was also introduced last night as well, which will go through the process and should be adopted in May. We thought it was important to have both the resolution and the ordinance to show that the council and the mayor were in agreement with the agreement that was negotiated over these many, many, many months, both for the board and for the court going forward, so they can see that, where we stand at a level of agreement on this. We're going to keep moving forward in an orderly fashion. We hope to be through the court, in July at the latest, but I can't control the court's timetable, obviously. But they were very receptive to coming in with a stipulation of the stakeholders in the Act 47 litigation, and moving forward with a hearing, which is required under Act 47, and then having final hearing and a final order pertaining limited jurisdiction over a handful of matters. After that happens and it becomes a final order 30 days later, then matters could be executed and move forward at that point in time. That's the framework we're in right now. We don't expect any hiccups, but you don't know until you get there. There was an awful lot of participants in the Act 47 process to getting to where we are.
I'm sure Marita would have something to say about that. And no, she'll be glad to have Act 47 behind her. But we'll miss you. You'll have to come back anyway. Does anyone have any questions of Neil? I will tell you, Anna Marie did a marvelous job. Not so many specifics.
Neil did a much better job, though.
Yeah.
We've been living it with for a long time. So, but I will note that the resolution that was presented to council did have a request to that, and I advised the council last night I'd bring it to the board. The same I brought to Anne Marie to change one word in the final agreement. After I think we worked very well putting together the prior joint recommendation of an agreement to the council, to the mayor, and to the board, Anne Marie and I understand the board, had some needs that it felt it needed to adjust, which we understand. That's the process. But there is one word which I do think makes a difference, which was the difference between in section, I think it's 405D, which has to do with parties versus authorities needs versus parties needs. And I advised the council I would make that request to the board. There is a concern about whether it will lead to unnecessary ambiguities in the future and unnecessary disputes in the future. And I think the tone that the parties are trying to set is one of cooperation. That is why the request is there. The resolution, which is probably the only one I've ever written that says with or without the following modification, is what it says. So the council fully understands that's what it is. And their last request to me last night was to let them know how this goes. So when they vote on the ordinance, where we are. So I do make that request, as I had advised Anne Marie I was going to, and advised council I was going to. And I realize you just voted, but.
Neil, I would suggest maybe, it's unfortunate that your phone, left you at the moment it did, because there was a very good discussion between several members of the board on that exact issue, outlining the authorities' thoughts on that exact thing. So I don't know how soon after these meetings, Jeffrey, you post this. But, all right, you may want to fast forward to that point and listen so that you can provide the explanation, because I really think everybody's on the same page. It's just this word, and I agree with Doug in the sense that I think it's a distinction without a difference. If you listen to the explanation provided by the members of the board this evening.
And I will do exactly that. I will listen to that. And again, it was the motion with last night with city council was to do it either way. And my job is to try to avoid problems down the future when I can, as is yours. And that's the only concern really on that issue is we don't know who will be at a table when, and if there's an open question, we worry about it. I will listen to the explanation certainly and bring that back to the mayor and council.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Neil, going back to the delay in the signature of the actual agreement, is it fair to say that that is to give the court the opportunity to make sure that there are no unintended consequences that impact what has gone before in the negotiations with other parties?
Absolutely, that is what it is. It's not to be accidentally removed from jurisdiction to make any further rulings. And that's what we need, is the court to be able to hold on to some jurisdiction on these long-term. Otherwise, if the parties have a dispute, it'll be 2 years before they get in front of a judge.
Yeah.
Under the current model, it could be there in 30 days if you can't resolve them.
And Madam Chairman, I think that needs to be relayed particularly to our legislative appointors, if you will, that we have reached consensus on the agreement and are delaying the actual execution to give the court the opportunity to wrap up the details under Act 47, that it's no longer something where the parties, sorry about that with the doggy, where the parties do not agree, but rather to give the court the time it needs to end this orderly process. Thank you.
I'd like to be able to translate what the dog is trying to say, either speed it up or what. Kathy, that's a great suggestion. I will, in order to give it its proper presence, I will make sure that we send that letter at the beginning of next week so that it doesn't get mixed in with the Section 203 report. It deserves its own letter. So thank you very much for bringing that up, Kathy. I think at this point we are at other business. Any board members have other business that they'd like to bring up at this point? And if not, then we move into public comments, and I believe Jeffrey has one at least.
I do. I received a series of questions for the authority from Mr. Epstein. And as is our tradition, I'm going to read them into the record, and then you could ruminate on the best way to get him answers to his questions. But they are in the order that he submitted them today, April 28th. Question number 1 is, what is the status of the GAP and GASB compliance? And he has a request: has the ICA received a response from the city of Harrisburg on this issue? His question number 2 is, what is the status of the corrected audit from 2019? And has the ICA received a response on that issue from the city of Harrisburg? His request number 3 is, what is the status on improving the collection rates? His question number 3 is, has the ICA received a response from the city of Harrisburg, I assume on that subject? His request number 4 has to do with debt service, and he wanted to know why there was an $800,000 increase in debt service. That was his question number 4. I think we can definitely get him the answer to that. Request number 5 is the status of the Neighborhood Services Fund, and he has a question on that. Has the ICA received a response from the city of Harrisburg? Has there been clarity provided relating to the accounting methodology, and has further analysis been submitted to the ICA on, and I assume he means the intermunicipal agreements. Question number 6 is, what is the status of the excess balance in the general fund? And has the ICA received a response from the city of Harrisburg on excess balance in the general fund? Question number 7 is the status of the workplace stabilization fund, and has the ICA received a response from the city of Harrisburg on that subject? And his final question had to do with the OPEB trust, and how will the obligation be funded? Was a timeline submitted, and has the ICA received a response from the city of Harrisburg? These are the questions that are submitted. These are excellent questions. And I will work with the board as well as the representatives of the city of Harrisburg to obtain information from Mr. Epstein in response to these questions. And they are all now officially in our meeting record. So thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you, Eric. Any other public comment?
Not seeing any at the moment. Pause for a second to see if anybody wants to send me a chat message with a question for today's meeting. And their fingers might be fast, but I'm seeing nothing. So that will be the end.
In that case, I would like to entertain a motion to adjourn our April meeting.
So moved.
Second? Ralph is seconding. All
Second, yeah.
those in favor say aye, and then we will say adieu until May.
Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Adieu.
Adieu. Adieu. Adieu. Thank
Adieu.
you, everyone.